The constant sound of rain beating against the large windows of Alexander Sterling's mansion echoed through its silent hallways. The vast Victorian-style house, perched on the outskirts of London, symbolized the success and power of the millionaire who lived there. Alexander, a 36-year-old known for his cold demeanor and emotional detachment, had built his investment empire on discipline and absolute focus. To many, he was admired. To others, feared. His reputation as a ruthless man both in business and personal life preceded him. Despite his wealth, Alexander's life was a hollow routine of meetings, business dinners, and high-stakes decisions. Everything in his world was meticulously controlled: his investments, his schedule, even the smallest details of his home. Yet this control left him isolated, his emotional walls separating him from the world. Isabella Clarke, 25, was unaware of the complexity of the man she was about to work for. Having grown up in a small countryside town and shouldering responsibilities early in life to care for her ailing mother, Isabella carried herself with a quiet strength. Her delicate features and wavy brown hair framed a face that radiated kindness, but it was her resolve that truly defined her. She arrived at Alexander's mansion on a rainy day, clutching the hope of providing for her mother. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thorne, a strict yet efficient woman, laid out her duties in no uncertain terms. Isabella listened intently, eager not to make a mistake. The mansion's grandeur intimidated her, but she resolved to do her best. A chance encounter. In her third week of work, an unexpected storm forced Alexander to cancel a meeting and return home early. Stepping into his grand hall, he noticed a figure kneeling on the marble floor, meticulously cleaning. It was Isabella. She hadn't noticed him at first, focused on her work. Alexander paused, observing her dedication before his cold demeanor reasserted itself. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sharp and authoritative. Startled, Isabella stood quickly, almost knocking over her cleaning supplies. Her wide eyes met his piercing gaze. I'm Isabella, sir, the new maid," she stammered. He narrowed his eyes, assessing her briefly. "Don't get in the way," he said curtly before turning and walking away. The interaction left Isabella uneasy, yet something in his eyes, a flicker of loneliness, lingered in her mind. Subtle shifts. Over the following weeks, Alexander and Isabella crossed paths occasionally. While their interactions remained formal, Isabella began to notice subtle details about him. The way he rarely smiled, how his eyes darkened during phone calls, and the loneliness that seemed to hang around him like a shadow. Alexander, in turn, found himself intrigued by Isabella's quiet presence. Unlike others, she neither feared nor fawned over him. Her calm, steady demeanor was a contrast to the sycophantic world he inhabited. Despite himself, he began noticing her. One day, Isabella found a book in Alexander's office while cleaning. To her surprise, it wasn't a business text, but a copy of Wuthering Heights. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it to a bookmarked page. Before she could read more, Alexander walked in. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. Flustered, she explained, "I was cleaning, sir, and saw the book. I'm sorry." His cold exterior seemed to falter for a moment. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Miss Clarke," he said, his tone less harsh than usual. The brief exchange left both unsettled, but it also planted a seed of connection. Breaking barriers. Over time, the walls between them began to crack. On a sunny afternoon, Alexander found Isabella tending to the garden. For the first time, he initiated a conversation that wasn't strictly about work. "I've noticed you take great care with everything you do," he said, his voice softer than usual. Surprised, Isabella replied, "It's important to do things well, sir. Even the small things matter." Alexander's gaze lingered on her, and for the first time, he spoke of his past, how he had been hurt deeply, leading him to build the emotional walls that now defined him. Isabella listened quietly, her compassion evident in her eyes. From that day, their interactions grew more personal. Alexander began seeking her out, drawn to her warmth and resilience. Isabella, despite knowing the risks, found herself caring deeply for the man beneath the cold facade. Transformations. One evening, during a thunderstorm, a power outage plunged the mansion into darkness. Isabella lit candles in the living room, creating a warm glow. Alexander, unusually vulnerable, joined her. Their walks in the garden became a daily ritual, a rare moment of peace in Alexander's otherwise chaotic life. Isabella found herself opening up to him, sharing stories of her childhood, her dreams, and her fears. In turn, Alexander shared memories of his own, a strict upbringing, a failed engagement, and the loss of his younger brother, which had ultimately shaped his guarded nature. "I thought if I didn't feel, I couldn't hurt," he admitted one day as they sat on a bench beneath the shade of a blooming willow tree. "But I see now that shutting out the pain also shuts out the joy." Isabella reached for his hand, her touch gentle yet firm. "It's never too late to change," she said. "The scars we carry don't define us. They remind us of where we've been and how far we can go." A test of love. Not everyone in Alexander's life approved of the changes they saw in him. His business partner, Richard Hensley, a man as ruthless as Alexander once was, confronted him during a meeting. "You're distracted, Alexander," Richard said, his tone sharp. "This infatuation is making you soft. People are starting to notice." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "What people notice is that I've become a better man. If that's a problem, then perhaps I need to reassess the company I keep." The remark ended their discussion, but it planted a seed of doubt in Alexander's mind. Could he balance the demands of his empire with the vulnerability Isabella brought into his life? He wrestled with the question late into the night, pacing his study as the storm outside mirrored his inner turmoil. Isabella, sensing his unease, knocked softly on the door. "May I come in?" Alexander hesitated before nodding. She stepped inside, her presence a balm to his restless spirit. "You're thinking too much," she said gently. "Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." He looked at her, the weight of his emotions evident in his eyes. "I'm afraid, Isabella. Afraid of failing you, of losing everything I've worked for." She stepped closer, her voice firm yet tender. "You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Her words were a lifeline, and in that moment, Alexander realized that the greatest risk wasn't letting someone in. It was letting her go. Building a future. Over the months, Alexander and Isabella worked to bridge the gap between their worlds. He introduced her to his friends and colleagues, defying the whispers and judgment of high society. Isabella, in turn, encouraged him to reconnect with his estranged family, helping him mend relationships that had long been broken. One sunny afternoon, Alexander surprised Isabella with a visit to her childhood home. Her mother, now recovering thanks to Alexander's generosity, greeted them with open arms. The small house, filled with warmth and laughter, was a stark contrast to the cold grandeur of his mansion. For the first time, Alexander felt what it meant to belong. "Thank you," Isabella whispered as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset. "For what?" he asked, genuinely curious. "For letting yourself be loved," she said simply. Love's legacy. Alexander and Isabella's love story became a source of inspiration for those around them. His transformation from a cold, detached businessman to a compassionate leader revitalized his company and his personal life. Together, they founded a charitable foundation to support struggling families, using their own experiences as a guide. Their mansion, once a symbol of isolation, became a home filled with laughter, warmth, and purpose. And as the years passed, their love only grew stronger, proving that even the most guarded hearts can find healing in the light of connection. Alexander and Isabella's story wasn't just about love. It was about redemption, resilience, and the power of vulnerability. They taught each other that life's greatest treasures aren't found in wealth or power, but in the simple, profound act of opening one's heart to another. A life rewritten. Months turned into years, and the bond between Alexander and Isabella deepened into something neither had thought possible. Their journey wasn't without challenges, but every obstacle they faced together only strengthened their resolve. Alexander's transformation, once subtle and internal, began to ripple outward, reshaping his life, his relationships, and the very legacy he wanted to leave behind. Facing the world. The elite circles Alexander had long inhabited were not kind to change. Rumors swirled about his softened demeanor and his choice to elevate a maid into his inner circle. Invitations to high-profile events dwindled, and former allies whispered about his uncharacteristic behavior. Alexander, once indifferent to public perception, now found himself struggling to reconcile his love for Isabella with the expectations of his world. "Why does their opinion matter to you?" Isabella asked one evening as they walked through the garden. The autumn air was crisp, and leaves crunched underfoot. She was dressed simply, her presence a stark contrast to the opulence of Alexander's life. "It shouldn't," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "But I've built everything I have on their respect, their trust. If I lose that—" "You won't," she interrupted, her voice firm. "Respect isn't about titles or appearances. It's about integrity, about being true to who you are. And who you are, Alexander, is so much more than what they see." Her words resonated deeply, and Alexander realized that he no longer needed the validation of a world that thrived on superficiality. The only opinion that truly mattered was hers, and in her eyes, he saw the man he aspired to be. Redefining success. Determined to align his life with his newfound values, Alexander made bold changes to his empire. He began prioritizing ethical investments, turning away from industries and practices that exploited others for profit. His company adopted policies to support employees' well-being, offering generous benefits, flexible work arrangements, and scholarships for their families. These changes weren't without resistance. Shareholders questioned his decisions, and competitors mocked his soft-hearted approach. But Alexander stood firm, drawing strength from Isabella's unwavering support. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting, Alexander returned home to find Isabella waiting for him in the library. She was curled up in an armchair, a book in her lap, her presence instantly soothing his frayed nerves. "How did it go?" she asked, setting the book aside. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Difficult, but worth it." She smiled, standing to wrap her arms around him. "You're doing the right thing, Alexander. And that's what will matter in the end." Her faith in him was a balm to his soul. For the first time in years, Alexander felt a sense of purpose that went beyond profit or prestige. He wasn't just building wealth, he was building a legacy. Trials and triumphs. Life tested their love in unexpected ways. Isabella's mother suffered a health relapse, and for weeks, Isabella shuttled between the hospital and the mansion. Alexander, unaccustomed to seeing her so vulnerable, struggled to find the right words to comfort her. But he was there, bringing meals to the hospital, sitting silently by her side, and offering his quiet strength. "I don't know how I would get through this without you," Isabella confessed one night as they sat in the hospital waiting room. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. "You'd manage," Alexander said softly. "You're the strongest person I know." Her mother eventually recovered, and the ordeal brought them closer than ever. For Alexander, it was a lesson in patience and humility, realizing that love wasn't about solving problems, but about being present through them. The proposal. On a clear spring morning, Alexander took Isabella to the countryside where she had grown up. It was her favorite time of year, when the fields were alive with wildflowers and the air smelled of fresh earth. As they walked along a trail that led to a secluded meadow, Alexander's demeanor was uncharacteristically nervous. "What's on your mind?" Isabella asked, sensing his unease. He stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. "Isabella," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "You came into my life when I was lost, when I thought I had everything, but I truly had nothing. You've shown me what it means to love, to trust, and to live fully. I can't imagine my life without you." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. The meadow, bathed in golden sunlight, seemed to hold its breath as Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger. In that moment, the walls that had once defined him were gone, replaced by the boundless possibilities of their shared future. A home transformed. Their wedding was a quiet affair, attended by close friends, family, and a few trusted colleagues. The once cold and imposing mansion became a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Isabella added her personal touches, flowers in every room, cozy reading nooks, and photographs capturing their happiest moments. Alexander, too, found joy in the little things, helping Isabella bake on Sunday mornings, reading stories to the children of his employees during holiday gatherings, and simply sitting beside her as they planned their next adventure. The legacy of love. Years later, Alexander and Isabella stood on the balcony of their mansion, watching the sun set over the garden, where their love story had truly begun. The empire Alexander had built was thriving, but it was no longer the center of his world. His true wealth lay in the life he had built with Isabella, the laughter they shared, the lessons they had learned, and the love that had redefined them both. "Do you ever regret it?" Isabella asked, leaning against him. "Regret what?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. "Letting me disrupt your perfectly controlled life," she teased, a playful smile on her lips. He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Disrupting my life was the best thing you ever did." Their story, though not without its trials, became a beacon of hope for others, a testament to the transformative power of love, the courage to change, and the belief that even the most guarded hearts can find freedom in connection. Together, they proved that life's greatest treasures aren't measured in wealth or power, but in the moments shared with those who truly matter. This completes the journey of Alexander and Isabella, focusing on their enduring love, the challenges they overcame, and the legacy they created together. Let me know if you'd like any further additions. A life well lived. As years passed, Alexander and Isabella's lives became a harmonious blend of love, growth, and purpose. Their story was no longer just about a cold millionaire and a humble maid. It was about two people who found strength in each other, rewriting their destinies together. One bright summer morning, Alexander and Isabella stood at the entrance of a new community center they had funded. The center bore a simple yet meaningful inscription, "Where strength meets compassion." It was a reflection of the values they had cultivated together, a commitment to uplifting others while honoring their journey. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was attended by families who had benefited from their foundation. Many of them approached Alexander and Isabella, sharing heartfelt stories of how their support had changed their lives. Watching the joy and gratitude in their eyes, Alexander felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the success of his business empire that brought him this peace. It was the knowledge that he had finally used his influence to make a real difference. As they walked through the halls of the center, Isabella paused, turning to Alexander. "Do you ever wonder how different life would have been if we hadn't met?" she asked, her voice soft. He smiled, the lines on his face etched by time and wisdom. "I don't think about that anymore. Meeting you wasn't an accident. It was the moment everything in my life began to make sense." Isabella rested her head against his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "It's strange how life works, isn't it? The hardest parts often lead us to the most beautiful places." Alexander nodded, his hand resting on hers. "And the greatest lesson I've learned is that no one is strong alone. Real strength is letting others in, allowing them to teach you, heal you, and make you whole. A legacy of love, In their later years, Alexander and Isabella stepped back from the public eye, focusing on their family and personal passions. Their mansion, once a cold and imposing structure, had become a vibrant home filled with the sounds of laughter and love. They spent their days mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing not just business advice but life lessons. Alexander, the once ruthless businessman, became known as a man of wisdom and empathy, proof that even the hardest hearts could be softened by love and purpose. Isabella, always by his side, continued to embody the quiet strength that had first drawn Alexander to her. She reminded those around her that humility and kindness could create ripples of change, even in the most unlikely circumstances. On a serene autumn evening, Alexander and Isabella sat on the porch of their countryside home, watching the golden leaves drift in the wind. Decades of love and memories surrounded them, a testament to the life they had built together. "I think we did well," Alexander said, his voice calm but filled with pride. "We did," Isabella agreed, her smile warm and unwavering. But it wasn't about doing everything right. It was about learning, growing, and never giving up on each other. They sat in silence, hand in hand, as the sun dipped below the horizon. Their story wasn't just about their love. It was a reminder that anyone, no matter how broken or guarded, could find redemption and joy if they dared to open their hearts. The lesson: Alexander and Isabella's journey teaches us that love isn't about perfection. It's about transformation. It's about embracing vulnerability, breaking down walls, and finding strength in connection. Their story reminds us that no amount of wealth or success can replace the fulfillment of a life lived with purpose and compassion. In the end, it wasn't their differences that defined them, but their willingness to grow together. And in doing so, they proved that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most extraordinary endings. Their legacy wasn't just their love. It was the lives they touched, the hearts they healed, and the world they left better than they found it. A reminder to us all that the greatest treasures in life are found not in what we have, but in how we love.